I was green and good.
I've talked before on the channel about difficulties around horror gaming and comedy gaming in particular. Role-playing games have a particular structure and a number of participants and so on that can make these things difficult. Comedy tends to work when it's formulaic. Horror, it takes quite a lot more work to make it work in a role-playing circumstance. But there's a topic that I haven't covered that one of my subscribers brought up that is worth covering, I think, and that's historical gaming, which has its whole own set of difficulties and issues and areas of discussion that people have gone into down the years. So let's talk about historical gaming, and I think there's three main areas that we need to talk about, those being lore, verisimilitude, and fun. The sheer weight, the factual-ish nature of history is both a blessing and a curse if you want to run a game that's set in an historical era. On the one hand, you're spoilt for choice when it comes to sources and so on. There's plenty of books on just about any period of history you might want to examine. There's plenty of artifacts, there's diaries, there's personal viewpoints from the time. You can lose yourself in examination of the history and in getting a handle on that, and on events, and working out how to recreate them in your game. The downside of that is that sheer weight of material. If you think lore books, like 300 pages thick hardbacks of lore and background about fantasy worlds, is difficult, it's even more difficult when it comes to real life, because there are multiple points of view from various different sources, and the truth is hard to discern, whereas a source book for a game can tell you, as the games master, this is what really happened. You may also run into trouble if you do your research online and you run into all manner of conspiracy theories about aspects of history. This can provide good inspiration for a game, but you still got to be a little bit careful about that sort of thing, as they tend to play fast and loose with the real facts as well as the things that they make up. But if you want to make your historical period convincing, you need to have a decent knowledge of that historical period, or you need to be the only person at the table with decent historical information about that period. And because it's real life, because it's real history, many people have pre-existing opinions about this, that and the other to do with it, and players will be able to pick apart your understanding of the world, your understanding of the history, in a way that they don't necessarily do so with fantasy worlds, in which case they may not have read the lore, or they're waiting for the lore to be revealed in the game. You can still run into that with fantasy lore, but changing things in fantastical worlds is a bit less of an issue than doing it in the real world. So I guess the trick is to try and balance it towards the upside of history being real, in that you have plenty of information to go on, plenty to read, you can really immerse yourself, and that can make gaming into a very educational thing to do. Don't let that put you off. You know, if you're interested in a subject, if you're interested in a period of history, that's better than going to school, really, for getting you to grapple with the realities of that time and that issue. But you're spoilt for choice. Just don't let it overwhelm you. You need your representation of history to be plausible, not exact. Verisimilitude is the appearance of reality, the facade of reality, the believability of something. So your historical research goes a long way towards creating that, but you also need to consider the other structures that are in play, such as social structures. Now, if you're playing historically, you will often run into the problem that people in the past were not necessarily the nicest or most enlightened of people. Racism has been endemic in the past. Torture and execution were common. People of different races, different nations, different genders were treated poorly in the past. Now, there's two schools of thought on how you should handle this in historical games. One of them is to ignore it completely, which I personally don't agree with, and one of them is to incorporate it and use it within the game. Now, I think you can find a kind of halfway house here, without being historically revisionist. I mean, you have to consider that adventurers in any game tend to be exceptional people, and the people in the past who drove social change and so on tended to be exceptional people. So your players can be the exception, but I don't think you should whitewash the past and make things necessarily easy for them on the basis of race, gender, or whatever. You could maybe compensate them with a few more XP, a bit more skill, some extra contacts, something in the game to offset the nastiness that they're going to encounter. But for me, at least, if you whitewash the history, if you pretend these horrible nasty things never happened and everyone was fine with Victorian ladies going off adventuring on safari and shooting lions, or black people drinking in the same places as other people, if you ignore all that, you are dismissing and ignoring all the struggles and everything that people did in the past, and you're robbing yourself and your players the experience of stepping into another person's shoes. The oppressed person, or even the oppressor, that can be an interesting outlook to replicate in the safe environment of a game. And games are safe. The worst thing that can happen to you at the table is treading on a D4. It's all consensual. You can leave a game at any point. Just do it without being a disruptive dick. But as I say, for me, ignoring the darker, nastier side of history is doing a huge disservice to both the people who had to live through that and the people who managed to reform that to get us to the point where we are today. So I think that kind of happy halfway house where the characters are exceptional, they can, if they so choose, buck the trends of the social attitudes and so on at the time, while the world can still have those negative aspects to it. And if you ignore those aspects, it can definitely throw a spanner in the works so far as verisimilitude and immersion, which is one of the primary goals of role-playing, that can be hurt by not replicating the past as everyone knows it was. Fun means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Some people find cringe videos to be fun. Some people find roller coasters to be fun. It's all very subjective. Some people like being scared out of their wits. Some people like being disgusted. Different people like different things. But we're all united in gaming in that, hopefully, we want it to be fun. Even the people who want games to be taken super seriously and want to delve into very deep or personal or political content in their games, they find that fun. So everyone's unified in their pursuit of fun, but finds it in different ways. And at the table, you need to find a compromise that suits everybody involved. So everyone gets some sense of fun. Not necessarily everything that they want, but something that they want. And when you're playing an historical game, it can often feel like that weight of history can stop you from doing things, from changing that world that you're playing in. It's similar to the way in which a lot of fantasy games are set in a pseudo-medieval world. So a lot of the social structures and so on are familiar, and that helps verisimilitude and helps suspension of disbelief and helps immersion. But then they have the magic or whatever tacked on. And if you're playing a historical game as a supernatural creature or as superheroes or whatever else, there's no reason that you absolutely have to stick to history, save in the broadest of ways. So allow your players to disrupt known history and create alternative history, different interpretations of things, different sets of actions, and so on. If you're a superhero team on the beaches at Normandy, that could make a potentially huge difference to the way the war unfolds from there, for example. So let fun override all these other concerns, but keep in mind that those other elements can lead to a greater amount of fun, and fun in a way that people didn't necessarily expect. So the historical verisimilitude of bad social attitudes and so on, the players being able to influence that, to affect that, to fight against the villains who perpetuated that in history, that can be cathartic, it can be fun. Even though they didn't necessarily want to play in a setting that was racist or sexist or homophobic or whatever else it might be. But look, fun does override everything else, but you have to weigh it and measure it with those other things and the potential for fun in new and different ways. And that's how you continue to learn and expand as a games master, as a player, and as a game creator. Zang.
I can get you anything you want. You just have to talk to me. Talk to me. Talk to me. Talk to me. I'm your priest. I'm your shrink. I'm your main connection to the switchboard of souls. I'm the magic man. The Santa Claus of the subconscious. You say it. You even think it. You can have it.